And thank you to the American people for your incredible support for Israel in our war against the barbarians of Hamas. I thank you in English. I want to thank you in Hebrew as well. אני רוצה להודות למזכיר המדינה בלינקן, לנשיא ביידן ולעם האמריקני על התמיכה הכבירה שלהם במלחמה שלנו נגד הברברים של החמאס. אדוני המזכיר, אתה בא הנה לעם כואב, עם לוחם, עם של אריות, עם שנחוש לנצח את כוחות הרשע מסביבנו.
Who is determined to beat the evil forces from one hour to another. We hear about the stories of horror and the stories of bravery. The stories of horror say everything about them, and the stories of bravery say everything about us. And this bravery will win.
Mr. Secretary, your visit is another tangible example of America's unequivocal support for Israel. Hamas has shown itself to be an enemy of civilization. The massacring of young people in an outdoor music festival, the murder of parents in front of their children and the murder of children in front of their parents, the burning of people alive, the beheadings, the kidnappings of a young boy, not only kidnapped, molested, hurt, attacked, and the sickening display of celebrating these horrors, the celebration and glorification of evil. President Biden was absolutely correct in calling this sheer evil. Hamas is ISIS, and just as ISIS was crushed, so too will Hamas be crushed. And Hamas should be treated exactly the way ISIS was treated. They should be spit out from the community of nations. No leader should meet them. No country should harbor them, and those that do should be sanctioned. Tony, my friend, I say to you, I say to all of us, there will be many difficult days ahead. But I have no doubt that the forces of civilization will win. And the reason that's true is because we understand what is the first prerequisite of victory. It's what you just said in our meeting. Moral clarity. This is a time, a particular time, a special time, that we must stand tall, proud, and united against evil. Tony, you are taking that stand. America is taking that stand. Thank you for being here today. Thank you, America, for standing with Israel today, tomorrow, and always.
Mr. Prime Minister, I'm grateful to be back in Israel in this incredibly difficult moment for this nation, but in fact, for the entire world. If you'll permit me, personal aside, I come before you not only as the United States Secretary of State, but also as a Jew. My grandfather, Maurice Blinken, fled pogroms in Russia. My stepfather, Samuel Pizar, survived concentration camps, Auschwitz, Dachau, Majdanek. So, Prime Minister, I understand on a personal level the harrowing echoes that Hamas's massacres carry for Israeli Jews, indeed, for Jews everywhere. I also come before you as a husband and father of young children. It's impossible for me to look at the photos of families killed, such as the mother, father, and 3 small children murdered as they sheltered in their home in kibbutz near Oz, and not think of my own children. This was just one of Hamas's countless acts of terror. In a litany of brutality and inhumanity that, yes, brings to mind the worst of ISIS. Babies slaughtered, bodies desecrated, young people burned alive, women raped, parents executed in front of their children, children in front of their parents. How are we even to understand this, to digest this? And yet, at the same time that we've been shocked by the depravity of Hamas, we've also been inspired by the bravery of Israel's citizens. The grandfather who drove over an hour to a kibbutz under siege, armed only with a pistol, and rescued his kids and grandkids. The mother who died shielding her teenage son with her body, giving her life to save his, giving him life for a second time. The volunteer security teams on the kibbutzes who swiftly rallied to defend their friends and neighbors despite being heavily outnumbered. And we're lifted by the remarkable solidarity of the Israeli people, demonstrated in the long lines of people giving blood, in the hundreds of thousands of reservists who've mobilized, some rushing home from abroad, people around the country opening their homes to fellow citizens displaced from the south. The people of Israel have long and rightly prided themselves on their self-reliance, on their ability to defend themselves, even when the odds are stacked against them. The message that I bring to Israel is this: you may be strong enough on your own to defend yourself, but as long as America exists, you will never ever have to. We will always be there by your side. That's the message that President Biden delivered to the Prime Minister from the moment this crisis began. It's the message that I and my other colleagues in the government have delivered to our Israeli counterparts on a daily, even an hourly basis. It's the message that I bring with me to our discussions today, and it's what I'll affirm when I meet with the members of Israel's newly formed national emergency government. We welcome the government's creation and the unity and resolve that it reflects across Israel's society. We're delivering on our word, supplying ammunition, interceptors, to replenish Israel's Iron Dome, alongside other defense materiel. First shipments of U.S. military support have already arrived in Israel, and more is on the way. As Israel's defense needs evolve, we will work with Congress to make sure that they're met. And I can tell you, there is overwhelming bipartisan support in our Congress for Israel's security. Here in Israel and everywhere, we will reaffirm the crystal clear warning that President Biden issued yesterday to any adversary, state or non-state, thinking of taking advantage of the current crisis to attack Israel. Don't. The United States has Israel's back. We've deployed the world's largest aircraft carrier to the Eastern Mediterranean. We bolstered the presence of U.S. fighter aircraft in the region. We're providing other support as well. We continue working closely with Israel to secure the release of the men, women, children, elderly people taken hostage by Hamas. We're pursuing intensive diplomacy throughout the region to prevent the conflict from spreading, and I'll be doing that over the course of my trip in the coming days. Too often in the past, leaders have equivocated in the face of terrorist attacks against Israel and its people. That's why we've been adamant with all countries in the wake of these attacks, there is no excuse. There is no justification for these atrocities. You heard the Prime Minister say it. This must be a moment for moral clarity. The failure to unambiguously condemn terrorism puts at risk not only people in Israel, but people everywhere. Look at what just happened. Individuals from 36 countries killed or missing in the aftermath of Hamas's attacks. Europe, Asia, Africa, the Americas, no region has escaped Hamas's bloody reach. Anyone who wants peace and justice must condemn Hamas's reign of terror. We know Hamas doesn't represent the Palestinian people or their legitimate aspirations to live with equal measures of security, freedom, justice, opportunity, and dignity. We know Hamas, instead of promoting the well-being of its citizens, rules repressively and dedicates the resources it has to terror tunnels and rockets. We know Hamas didn't commit its heinous acts with the interests of Palestinian people in mind. We know Hamas does not stand for the future that Palestinians want for themselves and for their children. Hamas has only one agenda: to destroy Israel and to murder Jews. No country can or would tolerate the slaughter of its citizens, or simply return to the conditions that allowed it to take place. Israel has the right, indeed the obligation, to defend itself and to ensure that this never happens again. As the Prime Minister and I discussed, how Israel does this matters. We democracies distinguish ourselves from terrorists by striving for a different standard, even when it's difficult, and holding ourselves to account when we fall short. Our humanity, the value that we place on human life and human dignity, that's what makes us who we are. And we count them among our greatest strength. That's why it's so important to take every possible precaution to avoid harming civilians. And that's why we mourn the loss of every innocent life. Civilians of every faith, every nationality who've been killed. Tragically, the number of innocent lives claimed by Hamas's heinous attacks continues to rise. Among those, we now know that at least 25 American citizens were killed. We joined families in Israel, in the United States, around the world, in mourning their immeasurable loss. Nearly 15 years ago, my stepfather, who I alluded to earlier, Samuel Pizar, came here to Yad Vashem to perform the mourner's prayer that he wrote to accompany Leonard Bernstein's Third Symphony, Kaddish. Reflecting on the unspeakable horrors that he'd endured as a boy in the Nazi concentration camps, he wrote that man, though created in your image and endowed with the freedom to choose between good and evil, remains capable of the worst as of the best, of hatred as of love, of madness as of genius. In this moment, where evil, hatred, and madness have once more taken so many innocent lives, we must stand together, resolved to confront what is worst among humanity with what is best. We must provide an alternative to the vision of violence and fear, nihilism and terror presented by Hamas. That is what the United States will do, standing with Israel, working together with its people, and all those in this region who remain committed to the vision of a more peaceful, a more integrated, a more secure, a more prosperous Middle East. Thank you very much.
The United States standing with Israel, the message of support from the U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken, who's visiting Tel Aviv today. He said, "We will be by your side, always be by your side," to the Israeli Prime Minister. after the recent events, the Hamas attack on Israel on Saturday, which was followed by Israel declaring war on Hamas. The Prime Minister of Israel, for his part, saying that he thanked Americans for their support to the people of Israel and said he was determined to beat the evil forces one way or another, comparing Hamas once again to ISIS, which we've heard a lot in the past 6 days, and said Hamas should be treated like ISIS was treated. Let's bring in Willem Marx in Tel Aviv for us. So, Willem, we heard there from both leaders, from Antony Blinken and the Prime Minister of Israel. They have met, but there are more meetings, I understand, between Blinken and Israeli leaders. Talk to us about his schedule and what the U.S. is hoping to achieve during this visit.
Well, a deeply personal set of reflections included in that speech by Antony Blinken, the U.S.'s top diplomat. He will be meeting with a larger group of Israeli officials in the coming minutes, I expect. That will involve some members of Netanyahu's cabinet and also subsequently a meeting with Benny Gantz, the former defense minister, who, of course, has now joined an emergency government, and together with Netanyahu and his defense minister, Yoav Gallant, will be integral to the prosecution of this conflict that Israel is now enmeshed in. One striking element of that speech made very, very clear by Blinken was the need for Israel to follow all possible precautions to avoid civilian casualties, something we've unfortunately seen several hundreds of times over the course of the last few days inside Gaza. I imagine that will be an issue that the United States stays focused on over the coming days and weeks, as I'm sure many others in the international community will do as well. In terms of his schedule, following those conversations with members of the cabinet, he will then be meeting with the Israeli president, Isaac Herzog, also here in Tel Aviv, before traveling to meet with some family members of U.S. citizens who are currently either missing or kept captive inside Gaza.
OK, Willem, for the moment, thank you very much. Let's bring in our guest now, Tamer, who's Professor of Public Policy at Doha's Institute for Graduate Studies, specialist on conflict resolution and international aid. Tamer, as Willem, our correspondent, said there, we heard a very personal statement from the U.S. Secretary of State, a deeply personal statement, and very emotive language being used by both leaders, by both Netanyahu and Blinken. What do you make of this?
Well, it's good for them. I mean, but for me, where I see it, it's a very infuriating speech that has utter disrespect to human value, human rights, the chance of people to be treated equally. No single mentioning of the 1,300 civilians by large that are being or were massacred in Gaza, and the continuous war now and massacring happening in Gaza. Total disregard for the other side, the other narrative of the story. A speech full of misinformation, narratives that you cannot support with any evidence.
Yeah, we've heard again.
Yeah, again.
These things that we've been hearing the past few days: Israeli babies allegedly beheaded and so on. But there's been no proof of any of this information. It's just coming from Israel and the Israeli.
If the so-called guardians of democracies of this beautiful globe we live in cannot prove it, I would say the best way to go: leave it to the experts. You have an international court of justice. Bring the court of justice, let it investigate atrocities on both sides. Palestinians are open for this. The Israelis should be open for this. Why not to collaborate with an independent UN body and give it a mandate to come and investigate not only this war, everything from A to Z, and then present its report to the international community. If the US is so keen about respecting human lives for everyone, not for Israelis, as we said now, then go this path.
Well, he did mention towards the end of his speech, Blinken, that civilian lives had to be preserved on both sides, briefly mentioning the Palestinians.
Yes,
like a sidebar almost.
Exactly, that we're marginal. We're very marginal for them. Secondly, I'm not surprised from this speech and the way it was delivered. It's an elections year in the US. You have the Democrats who were dealing with many challenges internally, with a rising Republican Party. Trump is back on the stage. His rankings are high. To be honest, a failed also approach for Ukraine. They have a crisis in Taiwan. So the Democrats now, this is their chance. Their chance is to become more Israelis than the Israelis and to go after the Israeli electorate and voters in the U.S. to get their support. So I could link this to that. But in total, it's so depressing. It's so inhumane. And I think if there is any legitimacy left to the U.S. in this region, after this speech, I think it's totally eroded. I know Arab countries, Arab regimes, government, they're silent. We know the reality. But on the popular level, the street, when you talk, when you use this speech, when you talk this language, when you disregard the other totally, and you just spread lies and misinformation without any evidence, people will have a moral stand. And at some point, this will materialize into something bigger even. So this is not peace building. This is not conflict resolution. This is just increasing hatred, more wars, more conflicts. And it's just ugly and it's inhumane. So just to look at this
Tamer,
from one side.
Yeah, Tamer, we also heard from the Israeli Prime Minister about what might come next. He said, very vague again, about what the plan is going forward for Israel. He did say, however, that the next few days are going to be very difficult. What are you expecting in terms of Israel's ongoing response? They've said they want to crush Hamas, to root out Hamas from Gaza. Is that something that's achievable today?
As we talk, I mean, Gaza is already experiencing, it's going through hell, literally. I mean, literally now. So I don't know what's more can they inflict on Gaza. The entire strip is being whipped out, massive casualties. Yes, ground sending ground troops to invade Gaza. Of course, it's possibly they will do it. To what extent? Again, it's more or less there is some vagueness, level of vagueness that we don't hear a clear message, a clear goal on what's the future of Gaza. Is it toppling Hamas or is it weakening Hamas to an extent that it will never raise up its head again and it will be so overwhelmed with a devastated, marginalized Gaza for the next coming 50 years? I really don't know what's the deal. And the deal for sure involves regional partners. Right. The Saudis are there, the Emiratis are there, the Egyptians are there. They're very key player, and whatever is going to happen in Gaza, it will affect them. And we hear that the Egyptians also are not very satisfied or happy with what they hear from the Israelis, and they have serious concerns. Right. So it's, again, I think now at this point, Netanyahu is talking to his people. He has a very angry Israeli society that, and this speech and this language and this emotion serves this purpose. It's just more or less like, bringing the society back and trying to project leadership in times of crisis. But he's weak, he's done. Yeah. He's done. It's just a matter of time.
There was an opinion poll today of Israelis who thought at least 56% of Israelis think that he should resign and have criticized his mishandling of this crisis and the Palestinian issue overall. You talked about the region, and I do want to talk about the regional dimension because we're getting some lines coming in just now that Israel has struck Damascus and Aleppo airports. This is quite worrying. It's quite concerning because we've already seen some movement on the northern border with Lebanon, and now also it would seem Syria. How high is this threat today of a regional contagion?
It's very high, and it's hard to predict if this will evolve into a regional war or it will just remain focused on Gaza. If it remains focused on Gaza, Gaza will pay the highest price for sure. If it turns into a regional war, I can assure you this speech will totally change, the one we hear now. If Hezbollah enters the game, Syria, supported by Iran, that's, again, I think it's an Iranian decision to give, to decide whether to give a green light to Hezbollah and Syria to hit back or not. But if this happens, then the entire narrative and discourse will change because it will not be about beheading kids, this misinformation, or ISIS or whatever. Then it will be the region versus Israel, and we will see a new discourse of politics. So, but at this stage, we don't know. We don't know.
Certainly a very concerning situation. Tamer, Qarmout, thank you very much for the moment.
Welcome. My pleasure.